everyone, and welcome to Real Life Talks. I'm your host, Yvonne Heath, author of the book, Love Your Life to Death, and founder of the I Just Showed Up movement. So I'm so excited to be here with my new friend, Maria Kliavkoff. Did I say that right?
Kliavkoff.
Kliavkoff. I was practicing, but of course, I guess I should have asked you first.
Okay.
So, Maria, I have to thank Donna for connecting us. And I'm just so delighted to have participated. You had this 5-day challenge, Healthy Mourning. And, I realized in that time that no matter, people say I'm a grief expert. And I said, well, that's hilarious. I mean, I'm really good at, crying and wearing my heart on my sleeve. But we always have more and more to learn. And when you had this 5-day challenge leading up to, part of your programming that you, with how you educate people and share your knowledge, I learned so much, and you just gave beautiful language to so much of our journey. And, I'm looking, the elephant in the room, the thing that I like to talk about, grief, and how we can do grief differently, because it is a part of this life's journey. And so I thank you for everything that you do. And I would love for you to share, how did you start this journey and a little bit about your background?
Wow. Yeah. Well, thank you for this opportunity, and, always lovely to chat with you. How did I start this journey? Honestly, it started, I guess, when my father was dying, and I was visiting him in a nursing home. And because I went to a different city, I had all day to be with him. So I was sitting with him, and about the second or third day, the head nurse came up to me and said, listen, when you have some time, if you could just go and visit this other person. And she asked me to talk to a different person. And I went into their room and I chatted with them, and while my dad was napping. And then I came back to my dad. And the next day she had 2 more people she wanted me to talk to. And I thought, all right, well, it must be their families are out of town or something. I had no issue with it. The third day, I think it was, I was talking to one of the people and their family came in. So my idea of what was going on was shot. Right. I went to the head nurse, Jessie, and I knocked on her door and I said, Jessie, what's this all about? And she said, I don't know what you do. I just noticed that with your dad, I can clock to 24 hours after your visit, he's completely calm. And my father was an Alzheimer's patient. And so that was really extraordinary for her. And so she was testing me without my knowing it. And she was sending me, as she explained, to her most difficult, challenging cases of the day.
Wow.
And consistently, they were calm for 24 hours after my visit. So that made me start to look at what I was doing and kind of explore what I was doing. 2 years after my father died, I felt this real compunction, this calling to go and to visit a hospice and to see if I could volunteer. And I discovered that where I was living at the time, there was no hospice.
Okay.
And so I started one. And I was founding executive director of the hospice, which meant I was learning a lot about both end of life and bereavement. And eventually the RCMP, the RCMP in a small community is looking for any assistance to help people who are dealing with sudden grief or traumatic grief due to, traffic fatality or fentanyl, whatever. And so they came to us, the hospice, as the bereavement experts. I think we were 2 years up and running when that happened, saying that we really need somebody to lead bereavement support groups for these really complicated traumatic cases. And I knew what I didn't know. And so I decided to apply for funding to learn about it. And I got my Death and Grief Study certificate from Dr. Alan Wofelt and the Center for Loss and Life Transition, and just kept going with it. And eventually, for me, the whole conversation about grief and buried and carried grief and traumatic grief and complicated grief just became something that I had to be speaking about 24/7. So I ended up stepping down from the hospice so that I could found Healthy Mourning and create truly the Healthy Mourning revolution, where we revolutionize the way we think about grief and mourning, because I think we have to. I think, and I think COVID has shown that to us more than anything, that the pandemic of buried and carried grief in this society is astronomical, and it impacts us in so many ways that we have no idea of. And it's time that we stop being so mourning phobic and grief avoidant.
Oh my goodness. This is just like, I hear music and doves. I just like flying. I just love this conversation so much, because what you, first of all, wow, your journey, how extraordinary. I mean, you fell into this. You weren't looking for this. And then you created something. Oh, there's no hospice. I'm going to start one. And then you moved forward to buried and carried grief. And I just, when you were speaking to that, and when I was participating in your challenge, and like all the framework you gave us, and it just really helps. And so let's just go back and say, okay, what do you consider grief and mourning? What is the difference?
Yeah, that's a big part of, I think, our challenge in society, is that we use those terms interchangeably and we think they mean the same thing. We don't define either one of them accurately. When I was studying with Dr. Wofelt, what I learned fundamentally in the first day I was with him, and then I was just hook, line, and sinker for me, was that grief is the internal constellation of responses, thoughts, and feelings. But we think grief is sadness. Or grief is sadness because of a loss. We think grief is an emotion. I hear people all the time talking about the emotion of grief. And grief isn't an emotion. Grief is an internal constellation of emotions and thoughts and experiences that is a direct result of any loss. And it's not specific to death. It's any loss will trigger a grief response.
Right.
But it's internal. Mourning is what happens when we convert that internal grief to an external expression. So when we say we're mourning somebody, that's the external expression of our grief. If we don't find ways to convert our grief to mourning in healthy ways, what ends up happening is we bury and carry that grief. Grief doesn't go anywhere. And it's a huge myth that with time, grief will go away. Well, we know that doesn't work, because the symptoms of grief harden over time if we're not doing the work of converting our grief to mourning. And so when we bury and carry our grief, what we start to do is we start to lock in the symptoms of grief, and they solidify. So somebody who's been a joyful person, most of their childhood, and then all of a sudden something happens, and now they've become this angry person, and they just become angrier with every year. That is evidence of a grief symptom that got locked. Right?
Oh my goodness. Absolutely. I shared so many of those kinds of stories, like in my book, in different places, and grief is our mental, physical, and emotional internal reaction. Right. And so many times society's telling us to get over it. Society's telling us to get busy, and we don't want to feel those hard. It's work. Right. And so we just push it away. Right. And then it becomes what you so eloquently put, buried and carried grief. And you can carry that your whole life. Yes. And it can damage you along the way.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because the symptoms of grief show up in 5 different ways. So you listed 3, but they show up mentally, physically. And so physically, if we're locked down and we're bearing and carrying grief, it can show up in our physical world, and we can get very physically ill, right? So mentally, physically, socially, emotionally is the one that we all kind of know about, and spiritually, because in the midst of grief, we ask some really hard questions, and that spiritual journey is part of it. And we have spiritual symptoms of feeling spiritually isolated and having some real dark nights of the soul. Those are spiritual aspects of grief. And so we can get caught in any or all of them, right? And buried and carried grief, all buried and carried grief means is we've buried it. We haven't dealt with it. And society encourages us to do this. Like you said,
Absolutely.
Society gives us the buck up, move on messages. Society gives us 2 weeks to be with the grief and then go on.
Yeah.
And which is just ridiculous.
Yes.
And society expects us to be the same person we were before. When are you going to be that person again? And so many of us think that we're supposed to be doing that. And the messages of society, you know, we have to bring closure. We have to say goodbye. The funeral happened. Why are you still sad? These kind of messages, when our insides are bleeding, we are bleeding on the inside. And so we think we're doing it wrong, as opposed to understanding, no, society has it wrong.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. But, you know, here's the thing is, why would we know, right? We do not have these conversations. We have not normalized these conversations. And that's what you are doing. That's what I am doing. Let's normalize these conversations so we understand how we can do grief better, how we can better support ourselves and one another, how we can understand there is no timeline for grief. And there's much to be learned. Why wouldn't this should be something that we teach in schools? Normalize at home. Like children grieve and you know, and they bury it and they carry it, and adults don't know how to do it themselves, so they can't teach children.
Children actually do it better than adults do. And I'll tell you why. Because children haven't been socialized to do it differently. So unless an adult starts interfering with what a child is doing, the child can actually lead the way, because the child is following their internal reactions, their natural normal responses. They know how to approach it. They know how and when to dose it. So dosing simply means I can't be with this anymore. I need to step away. I need to distract. And we think we need to guide the child. No, the child understands that their inner guidance is what they need to follow. And if we took that wisdom and if we understood, it's not what society's telling us, it's what our insides are telling us. Because what most of us, our insides are telling us, we're searching for where our relationship is with the person who died.
Yes.
We're longing to find that relationship. And society's telling us, bring closure, you know, the funeral is the end. No, the funeral is the beginning of a really good grieving process. When a funeral is done well, that's the launching pad for the grief process that, as you said so beautifully, will last as long as it lasts. That's just the reality of it. Absolutely. Grief is a journey, and it's a process of life, and it's a completely natural process of life. But what you're pointing to also is it used to be that death was part of life. It used to be that death was in the home, you know, and that we would have wakes in the home. Wake meant staying awake with the body.
Yeah. Right? You couldn't avoid it. The children didn't leave. They were a part of it. I mean, it was at home. Yeah.
That's right. And so the children learned because the parents were doing what they needed to be doing and what they were supposed to be doing, right? And the children learned from that. But we live in the first death-free generation where, thanks to the miracles of medicine, we haven't seen death until we're in our 40s or our 50s, or for some of us in our 60s. And then it comes as a shock because we don't know what that is all about. So we follow society because, like you said, it's not taught in school. It needs to be taught in school now because it's not taught in the home as it used to be. And death itself has become this mystery to society where it's relegated to the back doors and the back corridors, right? If you're in a nursing home, after somebody dies, often there's a separate door that's used to take the body out. Now what's starting to happen, and it just, when I first read about this, tears just ran down my eyes. The body, there's a procession that leads through the front door.
Beautiful.
And everybody is given that opportunity to honor,
like an honor guard, right? As somebody, B.J. Miller, who is an extraordinary teacher of, doing death differently. He was saying, I think he was with Zen Hospice in the States, and he said they did that, and as the body was being wheeled out and everyone was, giving their blessing or whatever, they also put rose petals on the body.
Yes.
Right. And how beautiful to honor someone as they leave out the door that they came in, and and we can do this differently. And, I want people to like forgive themselves, because why would we know? We've pushed it all out the door. Now here's our opportunity to do it differently, yes. Right?
When we know better, we do better.
Well, exactly. And we didn't know. And that's why, so I started reading, and now, you've given me so much more work, Maria. Thank you very much, because I now started looking at the Center for Loss and Life's Transitions and Dr. Alan Wolfelt's work. Mm-hmm. Absolutely obsessed. And it's funny because I was sharing with you, I had just interviewed Ken Ross, Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's son, and we were talking about the fact that, there aren't 5 stages. Share with me about Dr. Alan Wolfelt and his start, and there's a connection there, isn't there, with Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross?
Yeah, well, it's his story to tell.
Yes.
But as a young man, his father afforded him the opportunity to study with Dr. Kubler-Ross and learn about her work. Yeah, so it's a very direct link.
Well, and that's so wonderful. And we all agree there are not 5 stages of grief, as she was sharing. Grief is not linear, it is complex, and there are many layers. And that was her message in so many ways. And that's, so the Center for Loss and Life Transitions, I have to let you know, I have to go there. Was that an extraordinary part of your journey?
Yes, it certainly was. Yes, to have the Death and Grief Study certificate and mine specialized in complicated and traumatic grief, specifically because of the request of the RCMP at the time. I was down there it started with 5 courses, because 5 courses is what that program is. But I've been down there, I think now it's been 8 times, maybe 9 times with him. I've been very blessed to work very closely with him. And very honored that he wrote on the back of my book as well. And
wow.
And I think for the work that he gives the world and for the inspiration he gives the world, it's a light, because that we bury and carry our grief is a fact. If we live in North America, we have some buried and carried grief.
Absolutely.
But it doesn't stop there. It doesn't end there. What he gives us is the clarity of catch-up mourning, and that it's never too late to convert the grief to mourning. And so for me, the healthy mourning revolution is all about, let's wake up to our buried and carried grief and move through it in healthy ways. And this kind of tied in with my personal story, because I discovered I was a womb twin survivor. I am a womb twin. Mm-hmm. And so I started to
explain what that is, a womb twin?
Yeah. A womb twin is somebody who had a twin in the womb, and the twin died while we were still in the womb. And so we were born, and we have been treated as singletons. We maybe think of ourselves as singletons, but the experience of grief in the womb is real, and the impact on someone's life is very real. Yeah. And so I became really obsessed with this notion of buried and carried grief, in particular with how that plays out for womb twins. And I remember going up to him as I was being introduced to this information, and I said, I don't know what I have to do with this, but I have to do something with this, and it's big. And he was very wise, and he said, it will come to you. What you need to do with it will come to you. Just stay with the work. And that's kind of been my mantra now, is to just stay with the work and whatever's in front of me. So while I was writing Healthy Mourning for Womb Twin Survivors, my mother died. And so my book became Healthy Mourning, Happy Loving, which was about that journey, because I had to write that journey. I had to stay with the work, as he said. And I'm very grateful to him. Brilliant, wise mentor, and just very grateful to him and all he does.
So I have to say, and I'm going to show this book here, Healthy Mourning, Happy Loving. So I'm going to tell you, Maria, the only problem I have with your book is that I highlight things that are meaningful. Most of every page is yellow. It's very highlighted, because with each, it's 52 ways to convert your grief to mourning with ease and grace, which is just so extraordinary. And do you know what my wish is for the world? Is for everyone to read this before
Yes.
before grief arrives, before they are mourning, so that it's like a roadmap, right? It's like giving you guidance. The time to find these wonderful resources is not in a crisis.
That's right.
It's not when your heart feels broken.
Yes.
Have this in your repertoire, have this at home, read through it, so then you know what to turn to. I found wonderful ideas in here, and I thought I knew it all, but apparently I do not.
Mm-hmm.
But it's such a gift, and it's interesting. It's 52 ways. So tell us about the journey of writing that, and how did all of these wonderful ways come to you? Was it a lot of it's your own experience?
All of it is my own experience.
Okay.
All of it is my own experience, because the whole intention of the book was, I realized after my mother died, and I already had my death and grief studies certificate. I had been working in hospice for a long time. That's a place where you think, okay, I know something about this. And I realized, in the moment of that death, in the moment of the death of the people who are anchors in your world,
Yes,
you become untethered.
yes.
And that became a word that I didn't even discover until many months after my mother died. I was getting on a plane. I was talking about this just yesterday. I was getting on a plane to travel to Europe, and everything seemed to be getting in my way of getting on this plane. And I got on the plane, and I had just a flat out panic attack. And as we were taxiing the runway, I realized I felt completely untethered to the earth. There was nothing to keep me there anymore. And when you feel that, when you experience that, so how do you work with that in that moment? How do you work with that panic attack in that moment on that plane? And I write about that in the book. But the way I write the book was intended to be a resource, and it was intended to be a resource for somebody who's going through grief brain. Grief brain is, I can read the exact same sentence 10 times and I will not know what I read. And I'm a smart person. So I'll want to throw the book across the room. It's just bringing up that frustration. But here's the thing about any grief symptom, all it's asking you to do is slow down. Any grief symptom you're experiencing, all it's ever asking you to do is slow down. Right. So what we need to do is we need to find the ways to slow down to the pace of our grief and listen to our grief to hear its wisdom. And so what I was tracking in the book, and because I was writing it for Grief Brain, it's as concise as I can in as few sentences as I can. A paragraph about what this conversion technique is, a paragraph about how I used it or came to it, given a personal experience of having utilized this very thing. So there's all 52 ways I've done it. And I've done it through many different deaths, right? Yeah. So it's that nutshell of an experience so that you can tap into the how that might work. And then the second page of the chapter, and every chapter is just the 2 pages, is how might you get started? And so we call them heart points, and instead of bullet points, they're little hearts. And the heart points are to get you to be listening into yourself. So when you read the suggestion, does that feel right? Does that sit right? Would that be a pathway for you? So that you start listening to your own pathway. And if this is a conversion technique that works for you, doing it in your way, not in the way that I did it. Oh my gosh. I love it so much. And the way you laid it out, it is so, it's user friendly and it's short and you can, and what you're saying is there is no right or wrong way to grieve. Only what's right or wrong for you. And the only stipulation I say, unless you're hurting yourself or someone else. Well, that's exactly it. Right. That is the stipulation. So unless what you are doing is hurting yourself or others, there is no right way to do this. What I say is you are the expert on your grief. And so listening into your inner guidance around this. And again, if your inner guidance is doing something that would be inviting harm to yourself or to others, that becomes the flag for I need external help. I need a counselor. I need support. Right. With that caveat in place, you are the expert on your grief. And that's powerful because our society doesn't tell us this, because our society tells us go to an expert on grief. And anybody who calls themselves an expert on grief, I'm always a little leery, because leaders in grief know that you are the expert.
Right. You are the
Right.
expert. I may be able to give you some of my own experience and things that have worked for me, just like you're doing. And I love that. You are the expert on your grief. There is no right or wrong way to grieve. There is no timeline. That is the reality. And again, the good news is that we can do this differently. And I feel like we need to learn. We need to learn about this and follow the lead from our children. And again, with children, the wonderful thing is also they're not going to be ashamed if they have a tantrum or they're crying. And that's also right what stops us. Oh, I love everything that you do. So tell me how, so you have your website is healthymourning.com. What resources can people find there? And of course they can connect with you there.
Yeah, whole bunches of resources. And thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, so it's Healthy Mourning, MOURNING, because I've had people
right.
spell that. And healthymourning.com gets you to links with my YouTube channel, Healthy Mourning Channel, to the podcast, which is Healthy Mourning Revolution Radio. It gets you to sign up for the Healthy Mourning Revolution live launch, which is the 5-day program that you're talking about.
It's so great.
Free.
Yes.
It's completely free, because it really is about get this information out there, make sure people know and understand and learn. So you can register for the next one, which is coming up on March 22nd, I believe. And you can also do a discovery call with me, and you can schedule a call with me. So all of the resources are there, and the link to how to get the book is there as well. So everything is there.
Oh, do you see? I knew this would fly by. Maria, thank you for all that you are doing to help people understand how to convert grief to mourning and further to healing, finding joy in their lives again. Healthymourning.com. Everyone needs to connect with Maria. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for all you do.
Thank you. So thanks so much for joining us on Real Life Talks. This is about learning how to just show up for ourselves and each other, and sometimes having challenging conversations, but they can be life-changing conversations like the one today. So my call to action, as always, if you want to live life to the fullest, plan your life, plan your death, and then just love your life to death. And always bring your own tambourine to the party. Bye for now.